Welcome, I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and you have found Beit Virtuali. One of the most gratifying experiences that I ever had as an educator came admittedly from not the most positive of underlying circumstances, but it was a class that I taught to a Barn Bat Mitzvah group years ago when one of the local churches had begun specifically targeting Jewish students for proselytization. Now, before I get too much further into that, it was one church and the other local churches were not happy when they found out about this. But after I found out what was going on, instead of dealing with this in a very direct way with the youth, what I did was taught a unit on logical fallacies. Now, this is great because we spent 3 weeks talking about slippery slope and straw man, ad hominem, and appeal to authority, appeal to emotion, appeal to ignorance, all these various different fallacies. And then the final test, it wasn't really a test, but the final way that we summed everything up was I presented a 10-minute YouTube video that was a video to prove that the earth is flat. And here are 11, 12, and 13-year-old youth that were sitting there, and every single time there was a logical fallacy in the video, they raised their hands, stated what the logical fallacy was, and also how to argue around that. Now, just imagine this, the look of dawning realization on their faces when they understood the traps that someone was trying to put them in, and how easy, once you're aware of what logical fallacies are being used, it is to get out of them. And they came to the conclusion that basically the entire flat earth argument is essentially a series of straw men, appeal to authority, false dichotomies, appeal to emotion. And these 11, 12, and 13-year-olds then had this background information, which certainly helped them when someone came up and said that they were believing the wrong thing and that was going to cause them eternal damnation. Now, first of all, the reason I'm doing this video is based on a request I got from one of the families where the older child was actually in that class and the younger youth did not have a chance to attend. And so shout out to Mishpacha Ship. I am so thrilled to be making this. But for everyone else, this is going to be an emotional subject for me because as an out Jew who's wearing a lot of yarmulkes on airplanes as I've been traveling, when the hat comes off, the amount of people who have sat next to me who decided that that was the time to pull out the King James Bible with hundreds of thousands of ribbons in it and tell me that I'm, don't really understand who the correct Messiah is. Yeah, I'll try to keep my focus on the group that really does target Jews, and that's Jews for Jesus, which is not necessarily, it's not a Jewish group, it's a Christian group, it's a specific evangelical group, who had a budget in the early 2010s of over $60 million to specifically target Russian Jews in Germany when I was a rabbi there, and so I've been dealing with this for a very, very long time. But regarding logical fallacies in general, there's a lot of really, really good videos out there. So I'm specifically going to focus on how they manifest in religion, which puts me in a position of having to dance across two different lines. Because on the one hand, there are logical fallacies that religions use, first of all, to proselytize others. You should believe as I believe because of blank, and then fill in your logical fallacy. Or within religions, in Judaism, our proselytizing, we're not allowed to proselytize anyone else. We don't believe that our way is the right way. It's just the Jewish way. But there are groups within Judaism that proselytize inside of Judaism, saying that my version or your version or their version of Judaism is not authentic or correct and you should do it our way. So certainly from within religion or proselytizing, there's that aspect. But there's also the other aspect. There's the logical fallacies used by people who are blatantly anti-religion. And I've been doing some videos recently on, hey, religion maybe, we should look at with a little bit more complexity. I'll put the link down below. There are a lot of logical fallacies out there, which means that this is going to be a multi-part video. I'm planning on doing this over the course of 2 weeks. There are literally dozens that I'm not going to cover, so if you want to hear more, I need to hear your request. We're still having a dearth of people who are asking and answering the questions and being in dialogue, and I need to know what it is that's important to you. So if this was valuable, let me know and I'll add a few more to this series. But I want to start off with a few meta comments, a few meta ideas, and the first one being logical fallacies are always what the other group engages in, but not me. And if you spend any time whatsoever on social media, you will find that, we kind of religiously engage in them on social media. This goes back to other videos I've done recently, that just because you've left a religion doesn't mean that you are not existing within a religious or a quasi-religious sort of dogma around your political system or around your philosophical system. If you have a non-falsifiable belief that no one can tell you possibly that you're possibly wrong and what you're believing is not objectively provable or verifiable, then it's a dogma just like it's religion. And if you're telling me that I have to believe that, then, or otherwise I'm a bad person or whatever the case may be, then you're engaging in logical fallacies just in the same way that a proselytizing religion does. And so if we say a statement like, you're engaging in logical fallacies, but I'm not, then we probably need to look in the mirror, because I've very seldom seen a feed that does not engage in them, and I found myself doing it as well. That'll be the very first fallacy that I start with. Another point to make up front is that as a rabbi, I'm in a slightly difficult position because Jewish hermeneutics, so the rules that we use in order to interpret our text and to derive law, are based on a series of sometimes logical fallacies. Now, I'm not going to talk much about Jewish hermeneutics. If you're interested, I am more than happy to do a video on that. But yes, we've got certain things like Gazvat HaShva. If you don't know what that is, look it up, or tell me that you want to know more about it and I'll tell you more about it. But we've got certain items that do not fall into any logical, verifiable sort of system. But it's because in Judaism, this is an internally consistent thing, not externally consistent. This is the rules by which rabbis derived halakha from Torah, from other sources. And as long as you could follow these rules, then essentially you got points for being really clever in the use of them. But these were not meant to then convince others outside of Judaism that this was correct. So it's a slightly different sort of thing. And quite frankly, there's a lot of this sort of, we understand that we're being very clever within Judaism. It's a bit of a game, halakha, and I don't mean that in any sort of pejorative sort of way. And if you're very confused right now, let me know and I'll do a video. So, already however many minutes we are into this video, let's jump right into the series of them for this week, and then I'll continue them next week and perhaps the week after. And the first one is the one that I want to look in the mirror because I am very guilty of this one. It's called the Fallacy Fallacy, which, come on, if I'm doing a video on logical fallacies, let's start with the Fallacy Fallacy. It's otherwise known as the argument from fallacy. And what this essentially says is that if I'm trying to make an argument to support a particular conclusion and my argument is false, I can't then go around and claim that the conclusion is false because my argument is false. And the way that this manifests with me is when I hear someone with whom I have profound disagreements making a false argument, I automatically almost always discount then any conclusion they come to. And, you know, just about any point of view is going to have some truth in it if we can dig down deep. And if we discount any truths that they come to, then, you know, we're engaging in that. Here's one of the most common ways that I see that engaged in. And the reason I wanted to start with it, it's not just something I do, but I see this oftentimes within non-Orthodox Judaism. People, especially who will come to shul once a year for a wedding or for a bar bat mitzvah or for a holiday. And then there's this moment when they encounter the rabbi and you have to say, Chag Sameach or Shabbat Shalom. And there's a defiance saying, I don't come to shul because fill in the blank. And oftentimes it's a rejection of religion because they've encountered some sort of false argument from within the religion. It's a really simple example on this one. If I were to say, you should pray because tradition says you should pray and Torah is always right, so therefore follow Torah, that doesn't take away, even though the argument is using circular reasoning, even though the argument is an incorrect logical argument and should not be one that causes others to believe what I say because I'm arguing from within my own tradition, it doesn't mean that prayer isn't a good thing. And if you want, I'm more than happy to throw up some of the wonderful studies that are out there that show meditation and prayer leading to stress relief. And this is something that's been known for quite some time. There's multiple studies on what happens when I pray for myself or meditate versus what happens when I pray for someone else. There's never been any scientific proof that's been consistent that if I pray for someone else that they get better, but there's an awful lot of data out there that if I pray or meditate, then my level of anxiety goes down, my sense of well-being goes up. So if I reject the entire concept of prayer because prayer is something that religionists do, then I'm engaging in the fallacy fallacy. And just say that fast 25 times, fallacy fallacy. Right, good. Okay, number 2, jumping right into it. Let's go into the plague of social media. This one drives me absolutely insane, and I have unsubscribed from a lot of YouTube channels simply because of this, and that's the ad hominem argument. I know, we love it. Every time that we throw a foreign language out there, we shut off our brain. If we don't know what an ad hominem argument is, well, you probably should, because you, I promise you, have used it. I have used it. The ad hominem argument is to take a trait that has nothing to do with the argument and use that to disregard what the argument is. So let me just be really brutal up front and give, between the last 2 presidents, a perfect example. example, how many people who did not like Donald Trump called him "oh, orange one" or something like that, and that's an ad hominem argument. Same sort of thing, those of you who do not like the current president in the United States of America, how many have used Sleepy Joe or something dealing with Alzheimer's or something like that to then discount what his arguments are. That's ad hominem. And it just absolutely is infuriating. I understand, especially late night talk show hosts who do this for a laugh, and you'll see this with the most famous ones out there. But the arguments that they're making then lose credibility. Because if you have to tear someone down, even if we think they should be torn down, even if we think they're a horrible person, if we're actually trying to convince someone using any level of reason or logic, and we're engaging in saying, you know, this person has a big nose, so therefore, which, you know, something that we hear way too often in human history, you know, don't believe that person because they're a Jew. Using any sort of ethnic argument or generalized religious argument all falls into that. Their argument has no validity because look at the black hat that they wear. Or within Judaism, he's a Reform rabbi. He obviously doesn't wear long enough tzitzit, so therefore his argument has no validity whatsoever. That's all ad hominem. It's also crossing over on several other logical fallacies. But this is what we do on social media. We attack people's characteristics and character instead of attacking their arguments. And I believe that character and someone's arguments to some extent are related, which will lead us to another logical fallacy next week, the argument from hypocrisy. But we really should police ourselves a little bit better on this one. If we find ourselves only being able to make our argument by talking about the hair, the nose, the clothing, something else that the person has done that is not a part of the argument they're making, we're engaging in a logical fallacy. And I think maybe the most extreme version of this one is when you engage in this, that means you're only preaching to the choir. There is no way that someone who is a follower of that particular person will ever listen to you. And so part of the decision-making process is ad hominem argument is a type of virtue signaling. It means that, you know, I'm going to get hurrahs and cheers from my own group, but I promise you the other group will completely discount you. And so are we in this only to get the likes from the people who already agree with us, or do we actually care about what we're arguing enough to try to actually convince others? Ad hominem arguments are going to completely negate our ability to do that. Okay, let's see if this one could be a little bit less soapboxy. The next one that I want to address is called the no true Scotsman argument. Again, one of my absolute favorites. The first time I really encountered this one was an encounter that I had in a city that shall remain nameless when I was walking around with my yarmulke in the United States, and I actually had my first encounter with Jews for Jesus. And it was brutal, and it was nasty, and I was incredibly upset, and my ability to be in any sort of debate with them was quite limited at the time. This was way before I began rabbinical school. I was working as a consultant and traveling everywhere. And part of the argument that was being made was something to the effect of the true Jew is the one who acknowledged Jesus from the very beginning, and I went and said, you know, listen, let's look at the times in history that various different Christian groups have used those sorts of arguments to negate Judaism, and that leading to pogroms and other of the many atrocities that have taken place against the Jews over the course of history. And the argument was, well, anyone who would do that was not a true Christian. Well, that's the no true Scotsman argument. That is the, whenever someone in my group is doing something that I make a claim that the group would never do, that's not a true member of my group. We need to deal with atrocities within our own family. And part of the way that we deal with that falsely is by saying anyone who has committed an atrocity from within our family must not be a part of our family. And that's not really how families work. No, also Jews, within our own family, we have people who do horrible things. Every single group of people has people who have committed atrocities. So let's actually acknowledge it instead of this, well, we are the perfect, wonderful, best tribe on the face of this planet, and someone who doesn't fit into that, they're not truly a Jew, or not truly a Christian, or not truly a Muslim. No, each of our families brings about complexity, and until we acknowledge that, we are engaging in a massive fallacy that will keep us from ever being able to look honestly at ourselves. Okay, last couple. Let's start with the false dilemma to start getting us to the end. So the false dilemma is when I say you've got choice A or choice B, and when we're not aware of how the false dilemma works, then I sit there and think, oh my goodness, A or B, and I have every right to often say, no, I'm going to choose C. And we see this contemporary all the time. I'm going to pick on the left for a second here because this is one of the most recent books that I read, is an entire study in a false dilemma. The entire book is presented as everything on the face of this planet. It's focusing on politics, but every bill that comes out, every political argument is either racist or anti-racist. And I refuse to engage in an argument where the entire argument is predicated on it's either A or B. I'm going to say that there's a lot of possible C's out there, although there are some very interesting points that are made, and one should not then engage in the fallacy fallacy, that certain very important conclusions that are come out are completely null and void because the argument has faulty logic. So right, listen to the previous ones and be aware of every level at which we deal with that. I've read as many books on the right that are engaging in false dilemmas. But let's recognize it when we read it. If we're not willing to, or if we're not bold or courageous enough in that moment to call it out, at least recognize that we don't need to be pulled into an argument that is based on a false set of principles. Let's read the arguments for what they are. But if we're making decisions and changing our lives because, oh my goodness, if I don't do exactly what this person says as being anti-racism, then I'm a racist, we've got problems. And we should make more sophisticated arguments than that, since racism is an issue and is a problem. Okay. Time for a deep breath. Let's go through the last one, slippery slope. This one is one that we hear all the time, especially in politics, but it also, believe it or not, I've heard this within religion. I literally had a parent, and I get this, but I literally had a parent come up to me and say that they would not allow, one of my requirements for the bar and bat mitzvah program is that the youth attend a certain amount of Friday evening and a certain amount of Saturday morning services over the course of their bar and bat mitzvah education. And I literally had a parent say that them attending services was a slippery slope to them turning off their brain and being dogmatic. Now, okay, I'm not going to spend 20 more minutes on this video, and a lot of that is, yeah, there are certain religious sects that are there to do pure brainwashing. I would like to believe, and I don't believe it's a false belief, that I've tried to work with kids to help them to be the exact opposite of that, to be able to make sure that they're not pushed into a dogma. But that slippery slope argument is something that we use all the time. Now, it's a dangerous one to say that that's a slippery slope. Let me show you a bad slippery slope, and then we can go ahead and talk about what perhaps a good slippery slope is. A bad slippery slope, I have to do this. Rick Santorum, back when the argument was being made for gay marriage as a legal right, and he said if that's made a legal right, then that will lead to people marrying their pets. And people are convinced by these arguments because we do fall into slippery slope. And that's illogical on so many different levels, among them being that it's conflating the idea of a relationship with something that cannot have agency is the same as someone that does have agency. And that's the entire difference between, well, it's definitely a slippery slope between marrying the same sex and the next thing you know, you can marry a 5-year-old. Okay, no, it's not the same argument. It's not a slippery slope. One does not lead to the other because one is based on two humans of agency, and another one is based on a human of agency and a human who cannot have legal agency. But the major danger of slippery slope is that we are trying to take a worst case scenario. We're trying to create a Jonathan Swift sort of thing of the most absurd sort of thing that we can imagine, that this particular need is going to, or this particular desire is going to lead to the most absurd sort of ending that can possibly be there. And one doesn't necessarily follow the other. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to those with whom we are trying to have an honest and good faith argument to, if we use slippery slope, that we actually can make the argument how one can indeed lead to the other, as opposed to arguing apples and oranges, as it were. All right, that's the end of this first video. Here's really what it boils down to, especially when we're dealing with religion. There's a lot of things within our religion that don't necessarily come into the realm of the objective or the rational, and that's fine. Quote from one of my favorite philosophers is, I make room in my reason for faith. The difference is what do I do with that? Do I require of someone else that they agree with me because of faith that I have? That's where we draw the line. Am I going to hurt anyone if I personally believe in the flying spaghetti monster? And the answer is no, for the most part. That could be more complicated than that. But if I then demand that someone else believes as I do, just because I have a very strong faith belief and my own proofs from within my own religion, the flying spaghetti monster is the holy pasta, then yes, I'm trying to be absurd, but you see the difference here. And we're going to get next week into the arguments from emotion and authority that, this is something so important to me, so you should have it. It's usually more about control. It's usually more about my comfort. I will be more comfortable if I know that you believe exactly as I do. Or I'm afraid of what society is if everyone doesn't believe exactly as I do, and we'll all be happy if we all agree the same thing. And that's never going to happen. And so taking what I have strong faith in and saying that you have to have part of that, you have to believe as I do, that's where we break things really quickly. And again, I'm not just talking about religions in a traditional sense. We do this politically, we do this philosophically, we do this sociologically. And the way to be aware that we're doing it is if we find ourselves having to engage in these logical fallacies in order to try to convince someone, then it is time to look in the mirror and ask ourselves if what we're believing is something that we should be trying to convince someone else, no matter how wonderful it is for me, no matter how beautiful it is for me. And that's the difference. If I say something and I demand it of you to say, you should engage in something that removes you from being plugged into social media for X amount of time each week, I've got good scientific backing up. If I say you have to pray in the Jewish way 3 times a day, I've made a big mistake. Even if it's to another Jew, you have to pray exactly as I think someone should pray, or even the way that Jewish law has said you must pray. You know what? You still have to figure that out. You still have to wrestle with greater things in order to figure that out. So I can say prayer and meditation is important, and I believe that you should engage in that. I can say that as a rabbi or a therapist. As soon as I say Torah says, therefore you should do, I've crossed a line. So that's it for week 1. Lots more next week. And I know this is pretty intense stuff, but folks, we're doing this to each other. This is how we're breaking apart. It's not getting any better. The only way for us to stop what's happening is to stop what's happening. And that means policing ourselves a little bit on what comes out of our mouths, looking in the mirror a little bit more carefully to say, are the things I abhor in group X the same things that I am doing? And with that, perhaps we lift each other up a little bit. In the process of lifting each other up a little bit, all begin to be lifted up. Thank you for being a part of Beit Virtuali. We'll see you next time.
כבודו בכל העמים נפלותיו כי גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד נורא הוא על כל אלוהים כי כל אלוהי העם